Today I want to explore how our traumas can lead us down a long path which can ultimately end up in surgery, as it did for me. Let's get into it. So the best place to start on this is with the two things that I think combine to get to a place where we can understand how our traumas can eventually lead to a place such as surgery and cause significant problems for us in terms of how our body feels. And first, we really have to consider something which was originally coined by Wilhelm Reich, and that's something called muscle armouring. And I think at this point it's very useful to just expand on what that is. So I'm going to explain in somebody else's words where that comes from and his himself. So Reich discovered orgone energy and also character analysis, and it all sort of culminates in practitioners moving towards somatic release, somatic therapy, which is the kind of things that I touch on with how we can use exercise to change how we feel and our experiences and how we can express ourselves. But Reich believed that when we experience trauma and we can't share this experience or process the experience, we store that trauma and the tension that comes along with it in our bodies. In that the fibers of our body take on the experience and the stress experienced at the time, and it lays dormant in our bodies like it's trapped in a muscle, which disrupts ultimately the flow of our life force and our energy moving through the body, and it can completely cut off the flow of energy to particular parts of the body. That can happen to all of us depending on what we're experiencing and which part of the body we're experiencing it in. A good example of that is anybody who experiences sexual abuse and the trauma that comes from that. We can have energy stuck in the pelvis area because that's a direct result of what's happened to them. And then this is how the body stores and remembers that traumatic event until we feel comfortable to process it and to learn from what that experience meant for us. So Reich stated that muscle armouring, is the condition that results when the body is bound by muscular contraction and does not flow through the body. And that's from Reich in 1936. So this is how far a basic understanding of this principle goes back. He saw that there existed character armouring, which he defined as the sum total of typical character attitudes which an individual develops as a blocking against their emotional excitations, resulting in rigidity in the body and lack of emotional contact. So in that, he's describing that we store these experiences and our traumas in our body, but that then has a knock-on effect as well in our personality and how we behave going forward. So it's a way of protecting ourselves both physically and emotionally from touching on the experiences which we experience during the trauma. And then when we start to think about things like people being triggered, it would be that something has touched closely upon that which we've spent a long time protecting ourselves against, so the defense mechanisms would automatically come out. And that's why I find muscle armouring so fascinating. He defined muscle armouring as the sum total of muscular, and then in brackets, chronic muscular spasms, which an individual develops as a block against the breakthrough of emotion and organ sensations, particularly anxiety, rage, and sexual excitation, again in 1936. So the overall effect of muscle armouring with character armouring creates the individual long term, as I just said, the combination between the physical shutting down of the body in certain areas and the emotional shutting down of the person in specific areas. So then our traumas then start to dictate how we go about our lives, how we react to certain situations. Now, there's somebody else that's worth mentioning here on this subject, which is Alexander Lowan. He was a subject of, or a student of Reich, and did his own work, which is covered in a book called Bioenergetics, which is absolutely brilliant if this subject is interesting to you. But he best summed up this overall effect as the character of the individual is as it is manifested in his typical pattern of behaviour, and is also portrayed as on the somatic level by the form and movement of the body. The body expression is the somatic view of the typical emotional expression, which is seen on the psychic level as character. Defences show up in both dimensions in the body as muscle armouring, and that was in 1976. So again, these ideas and the basic understanding of what muscle armouring is have been around for a very, very long time and understood for a very long time. But we're starting to see a lot of application of this in therapy and the way that people are working through traumas. So specific touch, breath, movement therapy are able to actually touch on these. And what I think is especially interesting about this is that we can then combine it with other things to look at them. Well, what can we do about it? And this is why training is so powerful to me, because if specific areas of our body shut down when we experience traumas or have particular experiences, and there are corresponding emotions which shut down at the same time, then surely we can map out those muscles which shut down when particular emotions shut down. And that's an idea that I first got from somebody called Richard Aceves, and the work that he's done around emotional mapping. And that's what he's done with that, and I have tried to understand as much of it as possible, but also implement with people I've worked with to see what the patterns are. And then on the other side, just to give you a full picture of then what can we do with that, it needs to be explained that we have two ways in which our muscles work, and it's something that Julian Pineau at StrongFit has come up with, which is his theory of torque and how muscles either create tension towards the center of mass, internal torque muscles, and external torque muscles, which create tension away from the center of mass. And what that does is give us a map of the body and how each of the muscles in the body would like to work, and that is particularly useful when we're trying to see what is going on in the body in terms of getting movement pain. But if we haven't had impact injuries which caused specific traumas, because an impact injury is a trauma, it's stored as a trauma in the body, Same as surgery is, tattoos, things like that. They're all micro traumas to the body. But if we haven't got that present, we've got movement pain when we haven't had a specific injury or an impact injury, then it opens up the possibility that then we have muscle armouring coming into effect from previous experiences. So we've got, with the torque theory, when we have muscle pain, a signal of muscle pain from the body, say it's lower back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, those types of things, it's generally speaking, when we're not talking about an impact injury, a muscle that is doing a job that it does not want to do because it's taking over for something that isn't working. So then if we've not got an impact injury which causes us to switch off from the muscle, then we must entertain the possibility that it could be emotional in nature, and we get back to muscle armouring and to trauma. So then I think the best thing I could do at this point is to give a personal example, because the penny really dropped for me on how powerful this could be when I started to work back through a couple of my injuries. And I'd had surgery when I was in my late teens, early 20s, on my knees to repair ACL, my ACL, which is Anterior Cruciate Ligament. And what that ligament does is runs through the knee joint to attach the femur at the top to the bones of the lower leg, and that runs through the knee and prevents lateral movement of the knee. And the reason that snapped for me was because the knee dove too far inwards when I was playing football. The knee wasn't able to be stabilized by the muscles around the joint and caused the knee to dive in too far, which stretched the ligament too far, and it snapped. And you think, well, that's just likely a freak injury, which is what I thought for many years, until I came across the culmination of these two ideas. Because what should have been doing the job to stabilize my knee at that point was the inner hamstring. And my inner hamstrings, as I know now, are chronically weak, or were chronically weak. I had very much an imbalance from front to back. My quads would be much stronger than my hamstrings. But then that causes a problem in that when I'm looking to stabilize my knee, then my quads are going to try to do the job and they can't, and the adductors and the inner hamstrings are not doing the job to stabilize the knee joint from the back, so it dives forward and in, and I get the ACL injury from a weakness in the hamstring. So it could just be that we leave it there, and weak hamstrings, internal hamstrings, will create a problem for stabilizing the knee joint, which is true. But also there may be another layer, which I believe is applicable to this certain situation. And that's that muscle armouring came into play, because that would explain why I would always use the quads over the hamstrings and the glutes. Because the work of Richard Aceves, as I've mentioned before, dives into which muscles seem to be associated with the muscle armouring and the muscle shutdown in the body, and linking that back to the corresponding emotion. And if you look back in any sort of Eastern texts and how they approach the body, the masculine and warrior side of the body is always the right hand side, and the feminine is always the left hand side, the more creative. So if we're looking at, when it comes to the body which side we have a particular issue on. If we're looking at the left-hand side, it's predominantly feminine in nature and towards self and parasympathetic in terms of the nervous system. And then on the right-hand side of the body, we're looking at masculine, we're looking at sympathetic, and more of the outside world and navigating the outside world. And then we go a step further, and what you'll tend to find is that those people who lack a sense of safety, and especially when it comes to parental relationships, will lose connection to the inside hamstrings. So then we can start to boil down to, well, if we've got that disconnection of there's no safety in the hamstrings, which side are we looking at? And my left was worse than my right. So we're looking at inside world safety, and we're looking at maternal safety, which is not something that as a child I felt I had. You may have seen that I've mentioned things like this before, but as a child I never felt particularly safe in terms of my nervous system, never felt safe in my mother's presence. So if I have experiences where I don't feel safety around my feminine caregiver, and then that leads on into my movement patterns, then if we get to a place where we understand that safety is in the hamstrings, so what we've got then is a movement pattern for life because of the muscle armouring that, unless addressed, means that the left inside hamstring is going to be very difficult to connect to, because not only is the muscle not firing properly, but there's also stored emotion in there which needs to be processed at the same time. So there's a lot of care to be taken when it comes to finding these types of issues, because we need to make sure that we are ready to deal with any potential experiences which may come up when we do actually start to connect to those parts of the body where muscle armouring is occurring. So I believe that I could have now prevented my former self from tearing my ACLs, and I believe that if we can catch the muscle armouring early enough, then the almost inevitable injuries to come can be prevented. But this just outlines how difficult and how complex the body is, and how sophisticated it is in the way it works and it combines experiences. Because if we've shut off from that muscle and from that emotional experience, then we've done that for a reason. There must be a reason behind why we are disconnecting from that, and that's when we come back to what the definition of traumas is, and it's where we've got an experience which is too much for our nervous system to process at the time, and we feel like we have a lack of control in that scenario. So then if we're storing all of that experience and storing all of the energy that goes with that in the muscle and locking it off, you can be sure that if we go after connecting to that muscle and breaking down those layers of armouring, then we're going to start to release some of that energy and it's going to start to flow. And what you do tend to find is when we do that and we start to connect to what's there, the actual experiences can come back to us very vividly. So just a good way to explain this is if you think about the layers of an onion. Our experiences generally come in from the outside world into our cells, into our bodies, into our nervous system. They are processed and then go straight back out, and we can go on with our day. We've properly processed what's happened in our day and what we've experienced as we've navigated through it, and we haven't felt the need to store any of that energy. But if we have a trauma, we have that lack of control, we have that experience which is too big for us to process at the time. Imagine the energy going into that onion, into the center, but then it's too much for us to process inside. So we store that energy in there, and what happens is that nice little circle or that nice little path that we had into the center of the onion now gets messed up, and every single layer of that onion starts to twist, so that now none of the lines or the holes through each of those layers are any longer aligned. So we've got misalignment of that experience in our cells, in our body. And then what the job of releasing muscle armoring is then as we start to connect to the muscle, we'll start to align layer by layer what caused us to dissociate from the experience or that emotion and that muscle. So we need to tread carefully, because we've got the potential for the nervous system to say no, and we've also got the potential to crash ourselves if we push too far. So it's a very, very slow process to work through. And what happens over time is that we generally will, by creating safety around the muscle, around the experience, we will allow bit by bit that experience that caused the trauma in the first place to be released and processed. Something that we've also got to create alongside the safety is our capacity to be able to deal with things which are difficult, and that comes under distress tolerance. So whilst we're increasing distress tolerance and safety, it increases our ability to be able to work through and process those emotions that come up as we start to connect. And it usually culminates in a full processing of the experience which caused the original trauma and caused the body to shut down in the first place. And that can be a case of hours, weeks, months, depending on what it is that we've experienced. But we start to be able to process it, to bring it to the forefront, and to be able to no longer hold on to that and have our body protect us from it, which then starts to be able to enable us to release the emotional patterns which we've developed to protect us from that experience. So the triggers can then fall away because they're no longer needed for the nervous system to perceive that they are keeping us safe, if that makes sense. So that's really powerful for me, and that's probably the most important thing and combination of ideas which I've encountered whilst looking into training and looking into trauma and psychology and things like that. And I'll just to round off my example, when I started to work on connecting to my inner hamstrings, I did just what I've explained there. As I was connecting to them, creating safety, creating more tolerance of what I could push into, I got to a place where I felt like I could really push. And then one day I did really push, and that was under the guidance of Richard, and that brought the full experience of of why I'd shut down in the first place to the forefront. And all I had after that experience was a picture in my head of a small boy, me, cowering in a corner. And as a 32-year-old man at the time, processing that the boy inside had never really felt safe was huge. And the impact that then had on how I could show up for the rest of my life and show up for others was massive. But I never could have done that had I not approached these topics, been open to the fact that this could potentially be possible. These are all things that I've looked into after the fact. So I found all of these things I was starting to understand the talk, and I understood sort of defense mechanisms and things like that before. But when I really started to join in the muscle armouring, it made a lot of sense to me. And it seemed to be just the missing piece of information that I needed to complete that picture. But then that means if we can understand it and it's been experienced by a number of people, then it can be applied on a large scale with very much a lot of care. And I wouldn't suggest that just having listened to this you go and try things. I really wouldn't, because it can very much crash us and set us back further than we might think. So I know I've gone quite deep on a couple of things there to be able to explain the idea. But I believe that until we can look at our movement patterns and try to heal them, or to fix what's going wrong and causing us discomfort, then we're going to continue to make our problems worse. And when it comes to pain, I think prevention is very much better than the cure, because they'll continue to get worse. So if we're at a point where we need surgery, we need to look at, well, if it wasn't impact injury based, then can we entertain the possibility that it may be muscle armouring? And if that possibility is in your head that it may be muscle armouring, then it's going to take some work and some dedication to process through. And it will very much control our lives and dictate our path until we heal it subconsciously. So hopefully listening to what I've just said is an enlightening first step to realizing that there may be more to what's going on than simply just pain that's showing up that we will attribute to things like sitting in a chair. It's not that simple. It's never just that simple, unless we've got an impact injury. Hey, thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, like and subscribe for more of these videos where we'll go into different topics and you'll be the first to know about them.